Окей, скажете, коли можна? Вже? Окей. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us online and offline in beautiful city Lviv. It is a pleasure to us to host these presentations with the presence of the Lviv City Council, GMF, eminent practitioners and academias in the era of digital participation. My name is Mysyshyn, and I am the director of the Institute of Innovative Governance, and today I will moderate this event. My colleague and our today's speakers, Anna Melenchuk, is the co-founder of the Institute of Innovative Governance, and this is Ukrainian CSO and think tank which focuses on digital rights and inclusive digital governance. Ms. Anna is a ReThink.CEE fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, which with expertise on digital innovations and democracy, migrations, and European Union foreign policy. Furthermore, it is my pleasure to introduce today's discussants. Dear participants, I would like to ask you to mute your mics because we hear you here in the studio. Okay, thanks a lot. It is my pleasure to introduce today's discussants and Teona Turashvili, Media, Internet and Innovations Direction Head of the IDFI from Georgia. Also Artur Gurau, co-founder and CEO of the VoteMe.App from Moldova. Also, we are joined by colleagues from the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Alevtina Snihir, program coordinator from GMF, with welcoming remarks. Please, Alevtina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and thank you for inviting me. I would like to start with a huge applause to you for organizing this event, because this is such an interesting format, a hybrid format, which we didn't experience before in our ReThink.CEE presentation. So I'm actually very proud that it comes into life. And I would really like to make big applause also for Anna Melenchuk, who is, as you mentioned, very proud about. I'm going to say a few words about the approach at the very beginning, and then not take too much time and leave it for the discussion ahead of us. So the ReThink.CEE Fellowship was established in 2018 by the German Marshall Fund with the idea to force or to support young fellows, young generation of new thinkers and activists, in a promoting mounting challenges, democracy, and prosperity. So we are headed at this fourth round already for cohort of fellows we are now currently working with, and Anna is one of the third one. So I'm really happy that this great topic will be presented today, because digital participation, I think this is really one of our future challenges, and not only Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova will be facing it, but Central and Eastern European countries more broadly as well. So I'm really looking forward to the vivid discussion, and very curious about the questions we will hear today. So I think I will not take much more time, and congratulations again to Anna for this outstanding paper, and good luck to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Alevtina. Anna, now is your turn. Thank you. Anna, now is your turn to briefly present your paper. Just a moment, I will share my screen to all of you. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear participants and representatives, not only online, but also representatives today who are with us in beautiful city Lviv, as Anna mentioned. The title of my presentation, my paper, is Inclusive Local Digital Participation in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And I would like to start maybe from the personal story, how we got interested in e-democracy ourselves. Me and Anna, we are part of the CSO called Institute of Innovative Governance, and back in 2018, we launched an electronic petition to ban marshrutkas, this terrible public transport we have here in Lviv, and I see participants from Lviv are nodding, seeing these terrible pictures of this transport. And our goal was to collect online votes for people, from those people who are against this kind of transport and who wanted to change public transport in Lviv. In less than a few days, we collected lots of signatures people who supported our petition. We got lots of media support. As you see on the slide, we had journalists writing about us, international media and Ukrainian media, about the success of this electronic petition. And in about 2 months, Lviv City Council supported our petition, and now they are working on the reform of the public transport in city Lviv. Maybe I would...
and also because I was a part of this process with petition, it's really important to highlight that during this process, people with disabilities... Oh, sorry, I need to mute again the participant. I'm so sorry. Yeah, sorry. I just want to notice that people with disabilities, especially with hearing and visual impairments, blind people, they wrote us and they were... they was trying to approach us because of the e-petition services. We know that Lviv City Council is the only one source of official information and for petitions, and it wasn't accessible for people with disabilities. So we also had a project that supports the accessibility of websites of city councils. So we are together with people with disabilities, with the society, we had an advocacy campaign on this websites that should be accessible for those people to participate in a decision-making process of their cities and to be active participants active digital participants.
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. Indeed, so the goal also of my paper later in GMF was to explore how to boost digital participation of citizens in all of those e-democracy tools, with the specific focus on vulnerable groups. Because, as Anna rightly mentioned, we were approached by people with disabilities, people who didn't have access to internet but who wanted to participate and also take part in our online petition. My paper doesn't only look at Ukraine, it also looks at Georgia and Moldova. Maybe just to give you a short definition, that digital participation is the participation in public policy and decision-making using digital technologies. And to achieve inclusive digital participation, it's important to make sure that people who do not have access to technologies can meaningfully participate in all of those processes. So why Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine? As you see in the slide, those countries share similar historic paths in democracy building, which coincided with digital transformation in those countries. They were also interesting to compare because they developed close relationships among themselves within the context of the EU. In my paper, which has been published only yesterday, you can already look at the state of play on e-democracy, and you can see that e-petitions, e-consultations, and public budgeting are the most popular e-democracy tools in those countries, even though the general level of e-participation is still quite low. It's only 3 or 5%, but it's constantly growing because of the digital transformation. Some of the issues which prevent vulnerable groups to participate in e-democracy platforms, which makes them not inclusive, is the connectivity and affordability of internet, lack of digital literacy and education, cybersecurity challenges, low level of accessibility, low awareness of those platforms, low trust to local authorities, which of course leads to low trust to e-democracy. On digital divide, I would just like to say a few things. We know that in Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, we have one of the cheapest internets in the world. However, people still have challenges connecting to that internet, especially in remote areas, and people who simply do not have access to internet. There are also people who do not have any digital skills. For example, in these three countries, an average 20% of people do not have any digital skills. So in my paper, I'm claiming that it's important that those countries recognize that internet, data, and technologies are essential services and basic human rights, and provide different programs of support to vulnerable groups. There is also a lack of accessibility of e-democracy platforms, which I was analyzing in my paper. I looked into most popular e-democracy platforms, so e-petitions, e-consultations, public budgeting, and by analyzing them according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, we've seen that 95% of those digital participation platforms were not accessible for people with visual impairments, even though in those countries there are lots of people who are blind, who have some visual disabilities. It's about 7,000 people in Georgia, 4,000 in Moldova, and 300,000 in Ukraine. Therefore, this issue is also very crucial when we speak about e-democracy. However, it's not sufficiently addressed by decision makers and different stakeholders. Another issue was the low trust in local authorities and consequently to e-democracy. In Moldova, however, the trust to local authorities was the highest, and consequently also the trust to e-democracy was about 50%, while the trust to local authorities in Georgia and Ukraine is quite low, is about 30%, while in Ukraine the trust to amalgamated communities, newly established amalgamated communities within this decentralization reform is much higher, is about 50% as in Moldova. Since the low trust in authorities is an issue, it's important that local governments are paying specific attention to effective communication with citizens, that they ensure transparency of e-democracy processes, and that there is a binding nature of some e-democracy services. For example, in Lviv, this example which we gave to you on e-petitions, our local government is binded by the law to look through those petitions which were supported by citizens, those petitions who received enough votes. And that wasn't the case for some platforms in other countries, including Georgia and Moldova. So it's also important to make sure that local governments are committed to those initiatives which people are proposing via e-petitions, for example. Another issue was data protection and cybersecurity. There are only few cases of data breaches and cyber attacks so far, but it's we always need to be protected. And citizens, they would also feel much safer to participate in e-democracy when they know that their data is protected and they are secure when they are online. So one of the solutions which I'm suggesting in the paper is also that when we speak about e-democracy, we speak about GDPR, and we facilitate the transposition of GDPR into national legislations, which would also impact on the local level and on e-democracy, on the protection of personal data on some e-democracy platforms on the local level. We also recommend mandatory encryption of personal data and digital signatures, the use of open source software, and of course the investment in cyber protection software is something which is usually not on the agenda of local governments because of lack of funding, but that's definitely what we would recommend to prioritize. And finally, consequently, as we are speaking about Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, they are part of the Eastern Partnership Plus format and the Eastern Partnership platform itself. So it's important that these three countries strengthen dialogue and cooperation on e-democracy within these two formats. And I'm also recommending in the paper that e-democracy becomes a separate priority in digital cooperation with the European Union. So far, digital cooperation between the European Union and Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova puts a very strong emphasis on digital economy, on e-government and digital services. It's foreseen by the association agreements, so it makes lots of sense, but I also believe that e-democracy should be one of the priorities of the digital cooperation with the EU, and the exchange of expertise, exchange of knowledge with some of the e-democracy platforms with longer history of democracy building in some EU member states could be very useful for the further development of e-democracy in those countries. So yeah, that's the short presentation of my paper, and I didn't take too much time to go into details. Everything is there. The paper is not too long, so I would like to invite everyone to read it, and yeah, hopefully we will have some more time to discuss some of the key points presented today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, for your impressive presentation. And I already see some hands from the audience and questions. Please, could you raise your hand?
Скажіть, будь ласка, а як, на вашу думку, можна збільшити участь громадян на платформах е-демократії? Є такі методи, рецепти? Дякую.
Thank you so much for your question. The question was in Ukrainian, so let me maybe briefly translate it for our international audience. So the question is a bit more general on how to engage more citizens into e-democracy platforms. As I mentioned in my presentation, the participation in e-democracy platforms for the moment is pretty low. It's only 3 or 5% according to different estimates. So it makes lots of sense to think of how to boost the participation not only of vulnerable groups, but also in general the whole population. So I think one of the solutions could be the proactive communication by local governments, city councils, for example, about the existing e-democracy services. That's crucial. But another useful tip I would like to give is to share success cases and stories of people who managed to make some changes, political changes via e-democracy platforms, such as, for example, a success case which we shared with you right from the beginning. I mean, we need to speak about those cases more and more, and that would make other people believe that they can also make a change, and there are real people who are able to contribute to the development of their city, their community, and yeah,
it's nice to create a coalition of people to a community and allow them to participate together and define what is the real problem and submit. Even we know there's cases, sorry for interrupting you, but we know cases when you have a problem, you want to submit a petition and you need to collect signatures, and it's great if you have support, and it's nice that you have these people surround you with the same problems, and you can together collect the signatures and submit this petition to the city council.
Yeah, so that's also a good point. So not only the proactive communication by city council, but also proactive communication of those who have achieved some results with those e-democracy platform is important. So that's also something that Anna and I in our CSO we are trying to do to communicate about the success cases, not only our case but also cases of other people. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Okay, maybe we have some more questions, but I just want to give the floor to. Would like to invite Teona Turashvili to present her feedback to the Anna's paper. Please, Teona, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I'm Teona. I am from Georgia and I represent the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information. This is a local NGO which is working on different issues related to democracy and e-governance. I find this regional research to some extent very interesting because it covers very relevant issues and challenges. these countries, and in my case I can say about Georgia, very relevant. And it was very rightly mentioned, the main problem what Georgia has is a digital divide, which is very obvious. And for example, if we look at the type of divide, it's obvious that we have a huge gap in terms of accessibility to the internet among regions and the capital. For example, if in case of big cities, access to the internet is more than 90%. In case of regions, it's about 70% as some kind of good results for rural areas. So, of course, it's a very important challenge. And for example, if you look at United Nations results for Georgia, it is highlighted that Georgia has good human capital in terms of development of government reforms, but it lags behind in terms of infrastructure. So it means that to some extent people are ready to use internet and all the benefits e-democracy is providing to people, but they don't have access to the internet. And of course, they have the potential of using democracy tools. At the same time, I wanted just to highlight some of the challenges which causes such kind of results for Georgia. First of all, I would say that even if we look at developments over the past years, Georgia was regarded as one of the forerunners in terms of e-governance reforms since 2010. But later, over the past years, these reforms to some extent was stalled, and there is no ambitious reforms in this direction. And what I mean, for example, first of all, Georgia . 18. At the same time, even though we see that, for example, new e-participation tools are created to some extent by different government institutions, afterwards they are not properly promoted. So in this case, even though some of the institutions are active in terms of providing new tools, afterwards the use of such tools is not properly promoted, and the users don't know about such services. At the same time, if we look at the pace of development of e-services, it's very limited to some extent. For example, Georgia created this one window principle when it created this public service halls, which meant that people could enter one huge building and they would have access to all public institutions there in one place. But afterwards, these services were not digitalized. So now I think that this is the time when we have to digitalize all these services, which was somehow provided in one place. So I would say that this challenge was even demonstrated once again during the pandemic, when people had to just visit a particular this building to get access to particular services. So in this case, I would say that now we need some kind of new ambitious reforms in order to have better results. So these are just my reflections, and thank you so much. And I congratulate Anna regarding this report. It is very interesting indeed.
Thank you so much for these nice comments. I also would like to ask Mr. Artur Gurau, could you please share your thoughts on the paper?
Sure, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So thanks for inviting me to this event, and congratulations, Anna, for realizing this study. It was very interesting to participate. During the interview, it was very useful for us in the process of developing our own product. I will shortly present myself. My name is Artur Gurau. I am from the communication marketing industry, working in Moldova and Central Eastern European area for the last 10 years. But most recently, I'm involved in the development of a decision-making platform called VoteMe.App that is designed specifically for communities and organizations. And for the past year, we've been talking to a lot of communities, non-governmental, but also local communities, in order to understand how we can help them in the process of digital participation. In the study, there have been a lot of very good recommendations, and I really hope that I think there is someone else also talking at the same time.
Sorry again, to mute. Some people are just talking.
Julian,
Sorry.
please. That these recommendations are very useful. Particularly, I liked the recommendations in terms of the need of a much better communication, because as have been presented in the study, there are some efforts, but they are not known by the general population. They are not reflected in media as well. The big paradox, to give you just a simple example, on the participatory website that's called particip.gov.md, there is actually the Digital Moldova strategy for 2030. And I checked just before this call, there are 0 contributions from people to this very, very important strategy on the digitalization of Moldova. So it's a pity that actually, some things are done, are published because this is the requirement, but there is actually 0 efforts to communicate, to assure that actually these platforms they have a certain level of awareness and the level of engagement from the people. Otherwise, it's just like a checkbox, we've published that on a website, but there is actually no real contribution, no real impact de facto. The agency of the e-governmental agency in Moldova currently are focusing their activity, their digital literacy activity, working with libraries. But I think that it's important to focus their communication efforts and engagement efforts with local authorities, because as it was presented in the study, at the local level, people tend to trust more the local representatives. When they have a problem, they go to the mayorship. When they have a question, they go there, because usually this is the central place where all the information are presented. Also, because the local authorities are overwhelmed, and very often they don't have the necessary skills to run this type of exercises. I think that a possible solution would be the externalization of digital participation efforts, because maybe cooperation with the NGOs, or in our case, a private company, can lead to a much better needs assessment, to a certain training, the digital participation exercise per se, and after that to the establishment of the impact and the outcome, to some measurements and engagements, KPIs, to understand exactly was it really useful, and if it was, the next time how we can make it to be even more useful for the general public. So I want to say once again, congratulations to Anna for realizing this study, and I would actually encourage to make sure that the results of this study are also presented in the local media in Moldova. I will be happy to share the findings with the e-governmental agency in Moldova, and with some of the organizations that I know that are monitoring this issue.
Thank you so much.
That would be all.
I also have a question for you and from Teona.
Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have a question for you and from Teona. I'm really interested and curious. It's connected also to Anna's paper about data protection, what situation in Moldova and Georgia. It's interesting to hear your opinion. What do you think and how it regulates in your countries? And these issues of privacy and security.
The question was for me.
Yeah, for both of you, and for Teona, it's interesting to hear how it regulates in Moldova, for example.
I see. Well, about when it comes to data protection, it's often used by authorities to not provide information. Actually, it's a bottleneck. So maybe it was designed to protect the data, but more often it's basically a big barrier, a big filter to any change. The e-governmental agency in Moldova, they're doing a lot of efforts, but the reality is that a lot of institutions are opposing any changes, any transformation. They prefer to keep the status quo. And the same thing is with the local authorities. Anything happening new for them is the potential risk, because they have to make the effort to learn it, and to make it understandable for the entire administration. We have a law operating in Moldova from 2011, and in order to process data, there is a certain procedure. You have to register as an operator of personal data. The reality is that very few companies are actually doing, and organizations are doing it. And very recently, I think last year, we had this law amended, and it was used to basically to expand the area of applicability of this law. A couple of years ago, the biggest torrent in Moldova was basically stopped by the authorities to prevent the dissemination of piracy. But at the same time, a study done by some of my colleagues has shown that actually the piracy sources are still available, and more often their source is not the Moldovan authorities or the Moldovan institutions. Mm-hmm. So I really think that in terms of preventing it, targeted training is necessary, and also to promote best practices.
Oh, it's really interesting. And what about Georgia, Teona? What do you think? Can you share any experience?
I can say that I agree with Artur. The same happens in Georgia when they are using data protection laws in order to somehow not to provide particular information. For example, IDFI, my organization, had a court case regarding disclosing court decisions regarding former high officials, and they claimed that the court decision could not be disclosed because it contained personal information. But everyone knew what kind about this public official about whom we have been requesting this court decision, and afterwards we won against. So we won this case in the Constitutional Court, which claimed that this is not personal data. And now the Parliament has to adjust the existing legislation in order to ensure access to court decisions. And in general, I would say that due to GDPR, due to association agreement with the European Union, recently laws have been a law on personal data was adopted, and we have somehow provisions regarding safeguards to protect data protection, and special body was established for this reason. Initially it was called Data Protection Inspector, and afterwards it's called a State Inspector's Office, and actually they are monitoring not only public institutions but also private sector as well, to what extent they are complying with data protection regulations. And currently, government is the parliament is discussing new provisions and protections which will ensure that our legislation is in line with GDPR provisions. But in general, we as an organization who is advocating for access to public information, we are trying to somehow ensure proper balance between access to public information and protection of privacy, because in countries like Georgia, which is a transitional country to democracy to some extent, we see that sometimes these regulations are used in order to somehow not to publish particular data, especially very sensitive data such as public funds and salaries and bonuses of high officials. Yeah, so this is from my side. Thank you.
Oh, it's really interesting for me to hear, like a lawyer, to hear the personal data and the court decision, because we just had maybe recently discussion with some lawyers about Ukrainian court. So we have this registry with all court decisions, but the name are changed. And you can see the case, but you cannot see real names. And it's interesting to hear how it's regulated in Georgia and other countries. And also we have a similar question I see in the chat about Ukrainian case. They have a question how CSOs and local governments that run e-democracy platforms should collect personal data in the way that it is safe. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, and I also totally agree with Artur and Teona about their opinions on personal data. For me, it was surprising when researching e-democracy that personal data protection became one of the central issues when it comes to active citizens' engagement into e-democracy platforms. For example, for some grassroots initiatives and CSOs who are starting e-democracy platforms, the legislation in Ukraine is so difficult and so demanding in terms of databases, in terms of regulating the collection of data, that it really discouraged many CSOs, grassroots initiatives, and people who just simply wanted to make change via digital tools. The clear data protection regulations is crucial for making e-democracy inclusive and truly engaging for citizens, and that was one of the findings of the paper. And it's interesting that it became also one of the central questions of today's discussion. The recommendation for Ukraine, but also I heard that Artur and Teona mentioned about that GDPR would be the best solution for these countries when it comes to data protection legislation, because it's simple in its rules, it's very straightforward, it has very clear guidelines on how to store personal data. If we would like to indeed meaningfully strengthen citizens' engagement in e-democracy platforms, it's important that we regulate personal data protection in an easy, simple, straightforward way, but also in a way that those personal data in the end are safe, protected, and people are feeling like they would like to participate and share some personal data in order to vote for public budgeting initiatives, for example, vote for e-petitions or participate in e-consultations. So, thanks for this discussion.
Well, thank you, Artur, thank you, Teona, thank you, Anna. This is amazing. We also have many hands from our audience, so please, question.
Can I hear?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for your case about e-petition, and I would like to say that here in Lviv we still work on public transportation, and I would like to invite you to e-consultation this week on Friday. We will speak about this in mixed format as today, Zoom and e-platform. So thank you once again. And the question maybe first for Anna and also for all participants. If I understood correctly, you said that the level of trust to e-democracy in Moldova is higher now than in Georgia and Ukraine. So sorry if it's a mistake, but I would like to know your opinion. Why do you think it's so? Because you have a similar historical background, but maybe some regulations or something, some interesting cases maybe you met during your work. And the question for everyone maybe, what do you think, how this pandemic influenced e-democracy? And I know that today we speak about e-petitions, e-consultations, and participatory budgeting, but maybe very soon we will have some new e-democracy tools. Maybe you already have some and you can share your experience. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Zinka, from Lviv City Council. It's always great to receive some feedback from our partners. With regards to local authorities, trust to local authorities, in Moldova, I would just like to clarify that it's about the trust to local authorities rather than the trust to e-democracy services. Unfortunately, there was no research on trust to e-democracy services so far. I think that's something I would like to look into after, this first initial paper has been published, but that's also something to look into in future. I think Artur is the best person to answer that, why the trust to local authorities is higher than to national authorities, and why in your opinion it's higher than in Georgia and Ukraine. Maybe you would be better positioned.
Sorry, can you give the floor to Artur if you want to answer the question? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to ask to specify once again the question to make sure that I understood it.
It turned out that in Moldova, trust to local authorities is much higher than in Georgia and Ukraine. In Moldova, the trust to local authorities was about 50%, while in Ukraine and Georgia, it was about 30 something. So it was interesting to know. Our guests from Lviv City Council are asking what, in your opinion, are the factors that impacted on this local trust. Yeah, thanks.
I think the explanation is quite simple. Moldova is a very, very small country, but we have a lot of authorities. Actually, we have a lot of mayors per capita in Moldova. So basically, for every small village, you have a mayor, you have a local authority, and the distance or the accessibility is very simple. Yeah, so you don't have to go on a long distance to have access, and I think this is actually it's a good thing because there is this trust. But actually, it's not very efficient in terms of management, because you have a lot of resources and a lot of people that their job can be simply amplified by having the same issue be resolved by a mayor who take care, for example, of 3 villages or not 1 village. So I think this is the explanation. Very soon, I think in Moldova, because this is one of the topics that is discussed right now during the electoral campaign, because we have elections on July 11, we will have local administrative reform, and we will we have right now 32 regions called rayons, rayona, and I think the solution is to have 12 but bigger regions. This way you will save basically 2/3 of the budget that is designed to be basically used by these authorities. So this is my point of view.
Thank you.
Thank you, Artur. And I think the second question was about the pandemic and how a pandemic impacted on e-democracy. I mean, we've been for about 1.5 years already in the pandemic, so it's time to drive some conclusions. Even though for me it was still a bit difficult, I asked this question during my interviews to all of my interviewees, and I think I received the unanimous answer that pandemic positively impacted on digital transformation and on the future of e-democracy. It showed that some of the cumbersome, difficult, bureaucratic political processes on consulting with citizens, for example, in person, is taking so much time that it's better to do it online, and people are really willing to participate. They tried to work online, they tried to live online, so why not to also influence government online? So we see a very positive future for e-democracy. There will be also probably some new interesting platforms developed. I see that now crowdsourcing, crowdfunding are becoming big trends in the e-democracy sphere, in addition to traditional e-petitions, e-consultations, or participatory budgeting. So definitely a positive future, and it's great to see something positive coming out of the COVID. We hope that also this paper, of course, I don't want to brag, but it's a timely paper because we also speak about the inclusion of vulnerable groups, and it's time to, when those e-democracy platforms are developing, it's also very important to start to think from the beginning on how to include everyone, especially people who do not have access to internet, people with visual disabilities, people who live in remote areas, or who don't even have any digital basic skills on how to, access Windows, open some browsers. Usually older population. There is lots of work to do to bridge digital divide, to solve the issues related to personal data protection, as apparently it's becoming more and more important issue for every person. Privacy, sensitivity of personal data is something that people really care about, and they would like their personal data to be protected and feel safe when they're engaging with the government in the online sphere.
Just in addition, following this Anna said, I agree totally with everything and want to invite you also to tomorrow on another event connected to this issue. We will talk about how COVID impacted on the digital rights in the East Partnership countries, in 6 countries in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and Belarus. So we are welcoming. We will discuss e-petitions. Also, we will cover this issue. We will also discuss private policy. We will discuss cybersecurity, and we will discuss how COVID impacted. And also a very interesting topic that's really invited tomorrow at 6 p.m. It's about how applications, for example, the digital applications DOMA developed by the Ministry of Digital Transformation trace people, citizens during the COVID, and how we can protect our personal data. So you're welcome because it's really, really interesting topic.
I think we can post the link in the chat.
Yeah, we will share the link with all of you, and we'll be happy to see and to hear your thoughts and to discuss this issue. I will send you the link and share all the information, of course.
The question.
Thanks. And we have also one question from the audience. I think we have lots of questions.
Hello. How it should be funded, in your opinion, such a digital platform participation?
Thank you so much. It's an excellent question. Also discussed with the interviewees. In my paper, I claim that democracy does not have any business model. It's not something where you can get some funding by doing business, for example. Democracy should be supported by governments and should be supported by citizens themselves. For most of the e-democracy platforms which I have researched when preparing this paper, they were funded by governments, by international donors, so governments of mostly EU member states, but also US and Japan. And they were also partially funded by citizens. I mean, from one perspective, this created some kind of a sustainability because there were different sources of funding and they were mutually benefiting themselves. However, I would like to specify that the role of governments and citizens should be even more important than the role of international donors, as for example, in some e-democracy platforms, citizens were chipping in on a monthly basis to sustain some of the democracy platforms. It was the case in one of the democracy platforms in Ukraine, also I think in Georgia. So, you know, when people are able to pay some very little price for the service, it means that they're actually very interested in that service. So this kind of crowdsourcing, crowdfunding ways of funding e-democracy is a very important tool which CSOs, local governments, those who are supporting those platforms should really look into. Maybe less into the funding coming from international donors, as it's something which is not that sustainable, while also important, especially at the initial stage. I believe that international partners played a very important role in establishing some of the e-democracy platforms and sustaining them, supporting them financially, and that was of immense help. But how, in my opinion, what I'm also suggesting in the paper is that this support should come in the form of the capacity building and capacity development, meaning that international donors are sharing knowledge and experience on how to run those kind of e-democracy platforms, sharing some good practices, especially from EU member states. And that would be probably the biggest help for those who are running and sustaining those e-democracy platforms. Yeah, so that's how I would see the financial aspects of e-democracy platforms. Hope it answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Oh, we have one more question. Last one, I think.
Andrea?
Yeah, Andrea. Okay, the question is, to what extent can we use the successful experience of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova to support e-democracy and local digital participation in the other areas of the world, Central Asia or EU, Southern partners, etc.?
Yeah, that's a very interesting and difficult question to answer. I think in Eastern Partnership countries, especially those which I researched in my paper, there were some very good cases of, very also innovative cases of e-democracy platforms on participatory budgeting, on the fact that e-petitions had the binding format. I mean, that wasn't the part of my research. I wasn't looking into e-democracy platforms of EU member states, for example, or US or some other countries. But I know for sure that not in all over the world, e-petitions is something which is binding. People write e-petitions, then they go to governments for revision, and then it's up to governments to either support them or not, or even review them. While in Ukraine, they are bounded by law to look, review, and adopt those petitions which were supported by people. So definitely there are some interesting, good cases to share. Also because those e-democracy services and platforms, they were established quite recently compared to the established democracy in the West. Most of them appeared in late 2000s. So there are some also interesting features of those platforms. The way they're built, they're very, I would say, modern in some aspects. Because they are simply new. If you look into some e-democracy platforms in Britain, you see that they were there for years. You know, some of their websites are not that interactive and interesting to look at, but they have a longer history of e-democracy in their country, and that's also something which Eastern Partnership countries can learn from. Western democracies, where institutions are much better established, and there is a longer history of democratic building. So definitely interesting good practices to share, not only by Western democracies with Eastern Partnership countries, but also by Eastern Partnership countries with Western democracies. And in other developing countries, I think Andrea mentioned in his comment Central Asia,
Eastern Partnership countries, EU Southern partners.
Southern partners, definitely countries from Africa. For sure, there are some interesting cases, and as one of the recommendations of the paper, e-democracy should be one of the priorities when we speak about digital transformation. For now, the biggest focus when it comes to digital cooperation, it can be by the US, by the EU, is about e-government, is about personal data protection, which we discussed today, digital services, but it's rarely about e-democracy, and that's something which hopefully would change with time. The more people use digital tools to influence decision making, the more this aspect would become a priority. This aspect of digital cooperation, digital transformation would become a priority, and also an aspect for international exchange between countries all over the world. Why not? I think it's great to have this kind of cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks. Really like this event. I'm unmuted.
No, I think Alevtina has the question.
Okay, please, the question, we have still the question. Huh?
From Alevtina.
Alevtina, да?
Thank you so much. I will use a few minutes, if I may. First, we'll start with a short comment that this is especially interesting that Anna's paper interrelates very much with the work GMF trusts are doing. Actually, I'm particularly thinking about our Black Sea Trust colleagues. So this is actually a perfect example that it can be analytically supported and in this case animated. So thank you for this. My question is more like into the direction, Anna, what do you think, is there still a particular or a certain democracy level needed to start this kind of transformation in, let's say, in this case, Eastern European countries, although also Central Asia and Africa? Or could it be used as a tool, actually, to enforce such transformations? So is there a particular criteria we could use, or how would be the best way to proceed?
Thank you so much, Alevtina. I think it's an excellent question, a bit difficult one. In my paper, I'm claiming that e-democracy is a bottom-up phenomenon, and in my opinion, certain level of democracy building, established democracy is important for e-democracy to flourish, as government should be open, should be free, should be transparent, and open to engage with citizens that are interested to influence government. I wouldn't. That wasn't part of my research. I haven't researched the countries which are not democratic, but that's a very interesting idea also to see if e-democracy platforms exist in non-democratic platforms and how different they are from democratic ones. I can only guess that in non-democratic countries those platforms are top-down, so created mostly by government, and probably some of the messages on those e-democracy platforms are pushed by the government, so it can be that an e-petition platform could be run rather than by civil society organizations or some communities, it could be run by government itself, and the government can push for some certain agenda and could push people to vote for some specific questions to kind of mimic the democratic process, but in reality it's not necessarily something that is coming from people, but it could be orchestrated by governments. That's how I would see how it could work in non-democratic country. So definitely it could be interesting to compare if e-democracy can flourish. Open e-democracy, inclusive e-democracy can take place as such in non-democratic countries. So yeah, thanks Alevtina. I think that's a great idea for some future research for me. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Sorry, I have muted. Thank you, Alevtina. Do you have any questions? Or I see the raised hand. Oh, no hands anymore. Thank you so much for questions. Thanks, Anya, for answering. Maybe we have more questions from the audience or from Zoom participants. Please raise your hands or write in the chat. Or if you don't have any questions, Artur? Yep.
Yes, I would like to follow up a little bit on the questions of Andrea regarding the experience that can be shared from Eastern European countries to other areas, specifically to Central Asia. Very recently, actually last month, we just finalized, together with the colleagues from Georgia and Ukraine, a Democracy Tech Fellowship organized by Alliance of Democracy Foundation from Copenhagen. It's an organization that was established by Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Danish Prime Minister. And this program was designed for projects coming from Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. And I think that the solutions, like all the 6 projects presented during this fellowship, actually have, and during the program we worked on how we can scale them to develop not only in our countries, but to develop them on a global level. Having a certain particular experience and circumstances in our countries where the democratic level in general is very often not where we would like it to be. I think actually that, and I will talk about the product that we are developing, because we developed it with a specific business model, and it's actually, we consider it's the most democratic business model. It's freemium and you can use it starting free. So basically our approach is that democracy should be taught from classrooms. Basically, when you select the leader of the class, these are the first democratic exercises that you can engage, and you can train basically people that actually they have a voice. Very often in universities, the democratic procedures are mocked, maybe in some way or another. And of course, after that, kids coming from these universities, they don't trust the election procedures. And also, we don't have to put also all our expectations only in the authorities. I really think that some of the changes have to be done as well as the democratic processes bottom up. If there are organizations, for example, today I had a very interesting talk with the biggest professional union in Moldova. Is the union of professionals working in education, almost 100,000 people, and they really have this problem to engage them in the process of decision making, and the pandemic did actually signal this big problem. And I think the pandemic actually is not contributing to the digital transformation. It's contributing a lot to the realization that there is a big problem. You don't have to only digitalize some procedures, because if the procedure is, for example, it's not very effective, by digitalizing you only amplify the problem. So it's really a good opportunity to redone some procedures by thinking digitally first. So by trying to exclude some unnecessary steps, some design thinking principles that actually can be useful for the end user. And when we are talking about the public services, we should perceive them as well as services, as beneficiaries, and possibilities to improve them along any digitalization. Thank you. And I will post in the chat room a short presentation, a 3-minute presentation. If some of you are interested in VoteMe.App, I will be happy to follow up with you.
Thanks, great. We will gladly see the presentations. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. I would like to thank everyone and Anna, first of all, for this great presentations and research, and I want to thank all participants for your discussion, your comments, your great questions, and we will be happy to see you tomorrow on our event, and of course to see you on the future events. And I also to say thank you to Teona and Artur for your comments, and to thank Alevtina for your feedback, to Anna and your questions, and of course all participants. We will happy see you again in our next discussions, and be in touch. We can share each other presentations, links. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, and also thanks so much to GMF for the support of this paper, continuous support when preparing the paper, and being here today at the presentation. It's very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
It was our honor to work with you, really.
Thank you, likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Bye.